Hi, welcome back. We're at week 8 now. Today we'll be discussing how to write your research EBP proposal, evidence-based practice proposal. We're just going to get into some tips on how to write it. We're going to talk about the rubric for the sections within the proposal. And specifically, we're going to focus on the first 3 topics within the essay that you will be focusing on today in class through your group work. So here we go. So again, here is the thesis rubric. We are going to be finishing hopefully chapter 1 in this class, and then you will start working on chapter 2 next class. We've gone over this slide multiple times, but I just wanted to reiterate it again because today these are the 3 things that we will be discussing and working on in class so that you can start to develop your draft for chapter 1. We're going to be talking about the introduction of the problem, background of the problem, and significance of the problem. So chapter 1 outline, this is a breakdown of each particular subject matter you need to discuss in your chapter 1. Today, we're going to focus on the first 3. We're going to be talking about the introduction of the problem, background of the problem, and significance of the problem. And it sounds like, you may get confused and be like, well, what's the difference? Well, here you're going to see the breakdown of what each one really should entail. Now, remember, introduction of the problem is the beginning, the intro of your research problem. You're talking about, what the primary problem is, the methodology, and the importance of the research, why you picked it. The aim in this part of the paper is to really persuade your reader to want to do this research, learn about it, and then understand why you became so interested in it. Then we're going to get into the background of the problem, where you're going to give an in-depth analysis of the problem. You'll start to brush upon the literature review, but you'll get more into the review of literature and the sources that you use to complete your research within the significance of the problem. Significance of the problem, you're also going to give details about the importance of your study and how you recognize the problem within your own practice, why you came up with this particular research situation. Then you're getting into your purpose statement, your PICO question, and your conceptual and operational definition, which is basically the framework of how you're conducting your study. But that's something we'll work on next week. So again, we're going to focus on the first 3 things, the introduction, the background, and the significance of the problem in today's class. Remember, big thing I wanted to just point out, remember to proofread your paper before you submit it. Check your grammar and spelling, okay? You guys are at graduate level, so the expectation of grammar, spelling, and your quality of writing is a basic requirement. You will get points off when we do grade these theses if they do not have the correct grammar and spelling. That's pretty basic. So I would suggest you have somebody else proofread it, maybe a fellow colleague, one of your advisors, whatever you want to do, but that's super helpful. My mom is an English major. I always have her proofread my papers, and she always finds stuff that I need to fix. Okay. So again, I just wanted to review hierarchy of literature. I know this is a kind of a complicated thing to understand. It is expected that you're getting some of your literature evidence for your research paper with the level 1, level 2, level 3 evidence. So we want to make sure that you understand this very clearly. So remember, your highest level of evidence is at the top of your pyramid, where that consists of your meta-analysis, your systematic reviews, and your evidence-based guidelines, okay? There's millions of different types of pyramids out there. If you Google hierarchy of literature, you're going to find a bunch of different ones. Some of them have less levels than others. But remember, the top 3 are pretty consistent with the meta-analysis, the systematic reviews, and the RCTs, okay? Here's a quick video just to review the hierarchy of literature.
This tutorial will explain levels of evidence based on research study design, so that you can find the best evidence for your practice using a database. It was developed by the Physiotherapy Association of British Columbia for PABC members and for members of the Ontario Physiotherapy Association. You may be wondering why it is important to learn about levels of evidence. It is important because of how it ties into evidence-informed practice and how it can aid in your search for information. Evidence-informed practice aims to apply the combination of 1. The best available evidence, 2. Your clinical expertise, and 3. The patient's values and expectations to clinical decision-making. Generally, the higher the level of evidence, the more comfortable you will be in using the evidence in the literature to guide your clinical decision-making. So distinguishing higher levels of evidence from lower levels is an important skill in providing evidence-informed practice. This image shows the pyramid of evidence based on the research study design. When we are looking for the best evidence available, we can consider what types of studies have been published. At the bottom of the pyramid, research may involve investigations in the lab with test tube or animal studies. Based on the amount of research that already exists and the specific questions that researchers are trying to answer, there are other types of study designs. These may include ideas and opinions, randomized control trials, systematic reviews, and meta-analyses at the top of the pyramid. Generally, the higher up on the pyramid, the more rigor there is involved in the research, and thus the greater the level of evidence. However, the highest level of evidence will not be available for every topic you're searching. Typically, for a rare condition, a very new therapy, or a type of treatment which ethically can't be randomized, a case study found midway up the pyramid may be the highest level of evidence available to you. For many diseases, conditions, and therapies in healthcare, higher levels of research evidence are available. This may include RCTs, systematic reviews, meta-analyses, and practice guidelines. When this research has been published, you can start your research by looking at the top of the pyramid first. Let's review the different types of research studies. The randomized control trial, or RCT, is a very high level of evidence. It is distinguished from other types of studies because participants who are very similar at baseline are allocated randomly to one of two groups. While one group receives the standardized intervention, the other group, the control group, doesn't receive the standardized intervention. Instead, they receive usual care or a placebo intervention instead. As we will see in part 2 of this tutorial, the quality of an RCT may be determined by one of many different appraisal tools. A wonderful time saver for clinicians is to try and find a systematic review or a meta-analysis first. As we will see, these studies save you from reading 20 different RCTs to answer your clinical question, because they systematically and rigorously combine the results of a collection of previous articles published on the topic. Another research study with a high level of evidence is a systematic review. A systematic review methodically searches for, assesses, and summarizes studies according to predetermined criteria. Most often, these studies are RCTs. However, systematic reviews can also include a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis combines the results of several studies that address a set of related research hypotheses. The difference between a systematic review and a meta-analysis is that a systematic review combines the results of a group of previously published articles that use different outcome measures, while a meta-analysis combines statistically the results of a group of previously published articles that use the same outcome measures. A practice guideline is a systematically developed statement that helps practitioners and patients with decisions about appropriate healthcare, such as how to treat fibromyalgia. It may be multidisciplinary in nature, such as osteoporosis guidelines for MDs, which might include exercise guidelines relevant to physiotherapists. Most importantly, a practice guideline summarizes literature in order to guide best practice. It may or may not have used a rigorous methodology, such as a systematic review, to determine the recommendations. In addition, it includes opinions and usually a consensus process. In this tutorial, we have reviewed levels of evidence and how this can help your evidence-informed practice. The next tutorial will demonstrate how to use the Physiotherapy Evidence Database, otherwise known as PEDRO, to find the highest levels of evidence. Thanks for watching. Please check our other tutorials available through our YouTube channel and website.
So hopefully this was helpful again in reviewing hierarchy of literature, which we've gone over multiple times. In your meta-analysis, you included your levels, which is really good, and helpful to substantiate whatever research you have in your project. So like I said, in today's class, we're going to be going over the three top things to start to develop your thesis. So the first thing I wanted to just review is introduction of the problem. Again, this is where you're ensuring that you insert a hook in your paper to capture the audience's attention. You talk about the primary problem, the methodology, and the importance of the research. The main aim is to persuade your reader, right? So here's a little video on how to create a good introduction.
After the title page and abstract, the reader's first true interaction with your research paper is the introduction. Your introduction will establish the foundation upon which your readers approach your work, and if you use the tips we discuss in this video, these readers should be able to logically apply the rules set in your introduction to all parts of your paper, all the way through the conclusion. What exactly is the purpose of the introduction? Think about your paper as a chronological story. It will begin at point A, the introduction, and move in time towards point B, the discussion and conclusion. Since your introduction includes content about the gaps in knowledge that your study aims to fill, the results you elaborate on in your discussion section should therefore be somewhat familiar to the reader, as you have already touched upon them in the introduction section. The introduction must answer two main questions. Why was this particular study needed to fill the gaps in knowledge? And why does this particular gap need filling? Imagine our entire plane of knowledge as an incomplete puzzle. The pieces snapped together are what is established or what is known. The missing piece is the gap in knowledge, or what is currently unknown. This is what your study will be helping to explain. So the context you provide in the introduction must first identify that there is a knowledge gap and what it is. It must explain why it needs to be filled, and then briefly summarize how this study intends to fill that gap and why. The introduction is one of the most compact parts of the research paper, since it is not very long but needs to essentially give a complete overview of the context in which your study is taking place and your specific reasons for doing the study. Most tend to be around 10% of the total length of your paper. The introduction consists of background information about a topic being studied, the rationale for undertaking this study or for filling the gap with this particular information, key references to preliminary work or closely related papers appearing elsewhere, a clarification of important terms, definitions, or abbreviations to be used in the paper, and a review of related studies in which you give a brief but incisive analysis of work that heavily concerns your study. It could be a very similar study or one that supports the findings of your new study. So how should you structure your introduction? As you can see in this figure, your introduction should start broadly and then narrow until it reaches your hypothesis. The first thing you want to do is state your area of research and then immediately show what is already known. This is also known as background information. Then move on to what is unknown, the problem or gap you want to resolve. Finally, you should discuss how you will resolve this problem using a clear hypothesis. In step 1, you will show what is already known. Start with a strong statement that reflects your research subject area and ask questions or pose statements to frame the problems your study explores. You can ask general questions here to guide your readers to the problem and show them what we already know. For instance, what do we know about breathing capability of bottlenose dolphins? Use keywords from your title, the exact language of your study that is, to zero in on the problem at hand and show the relevance of your work. Avoid stating background information that is too broad in nature. You don't need to state too many obvious facts that your readers would know. If you are writing about bottlenose dolphins, for instance, you probably don't need to explain to them that mammals breathe oxygen. At the beginning of the introduction, you should also be sure to cite all of the sources that you use for background information and support. Only provide the necessary background information. Don't focus extensively on background, but use it to set up the context for doing this study. You should also review only relevant, up-to-date primary literature that supports your explanation of our current base of knowledge. In the second part of your introduction, you should answer the question, what is the knowledge gap? Here you will highlight areas where too little information is available. Explain how and why we should fill in that gap. What does this missing information do to impede our understanding of a process or system? And you should identify what logical next steps can be developed based on existing research. By showing you have examined current data and devised the method to find new applications and make new inferences, you're showing your peers that you are aware of the direction your research is moving in, and you're showing confidence in your decision to pursue this paper study. In the last part of your introduction, you will show how your study fills in the knowledge gap. This is where you state your purpose and give a clear hypothesis or objective of the study. The hypothesis is a very short, 1 to 2 sentence supposition or explanation of what will happen in your study. This is quite often written as an if-then format. If X and Y are present, then Z will occur. Here you should also try to answer the question, if we fill this gap, what useful information will the readers gain? Many researchers have difficulty when it comes to deciding when to write their introduction. It is important to consider the order you draft your research paper, for as you recall, everything else in the research paper must flow from the introduction. Therefore, because it is one of the most difficult sections to nail down, consider writing the introduction second to last, after the materials and methods, results, and discussion section, and just before the conclusion. This will ensure you effectively lay a groundwork for the rest of your paper, and you can use the research you have already compiled to ensure that everything in your introduction is pertinent and accurate. In addition to content and organization, writers of research papers should also be aware of grammar and style issues that directly affect the readability and strength of their printed work. Here are some guidelines for writing the introduction section. Try and write in the active voice when possible. This will shorten your sentences and enhance the impact of your information. Always strive for concise sentences. This will allow you to get in all of the necessary information in this compact introduction section. Use stronger verbs when possible. This also impacts sentence length and strength of writing. Be careful not to overuse first-person pronouns such as I and we. And always organize your thoughts from the broad to the specific, as we have seen in our model. A strong introduction will encourage readers to read your entire research paper and help get your work published in scientific journals. For more information and tips on manuscript writing and journal submissions, visit the resources page at wordvice.com.
So the introduction in this particular video, he definitely got into the background as well. So just try to differentiate in the paper that we're wanting you to break down. Introduction and background are definitely a little different. So use the information he gave you in terms of introduction versus background accordingly, okay? Next, we're gonna just get into a video about the problem statement. I like how she lays this out. She is a nurse, so it does make it a little more clear in terms of nursing research.
Hi, my name is Laura Killam. I am a nurse researcher who helps students make sense of complex information and create amazing research papers. I am going to show you how to captivate your reader so your paper or proposal will be the absolute best. In this video, I am going to talk about making the research problem clear. If you are watching this, you probably already know that you need a problem statement. But did you know that articulating your problem statement may actually be the most important step for justifying your research purpose? Clearly articulating the gap in current knowledge logically leads the reader to how your study will contribute to existing knowledge. This gap is broken down in the background section by critiquing previous research. But you also need to make sure you explicitly outline the gap in a problem statement. Your goal is to make it clear enough that anyone will see the problem the way you do. Make sure you understand what the problem is before you start to write. In order to create a logical argument to study an issue, you need to know what the problem is. Your problem should be interesting, clinically significant, and feasible. If you aren't sure what the problem is, talk to people in the field because they are in the best position to identify meaningful issues in need of study and ask important questions that will impact outcomes. If you pick a problem that aligns with the needs of an organization or funding agency, you are more likely to get funding. If you do some reading about how to write a problem statement in research reports or proposals, you will see authors talk about 2 key places to make your problem clear: right before and/or right after the background section. A general problem statement should be found in the introduction section of a paper. Tell the reader why the topic matters. This statement will lead to the background or literature review, which examines the scope and magnitude of the issue in more detail. The purpose of placing a problem statement in the introduction section of your paper is to catch the reader's attention early. Your teacher may call this part of the paper or proposal the significance of the issue. Before you start to write, let's look at what a problem statement actually is. The problem statement needs to identify something that is not known but that is possible to find out. A problem, by definition, is something that is wrong or needs close attention. In research, it is a gap in knowledge that you need to fill. Be sure to pick a problem that you can solve, at least partially. Throughout your background, you have been critiquing gaps in previous research. Now you need to be sure they know what the problem is that your study will be addressing. At the end of the literature review, a specific problem that your study will address should be clearly articulated. This statement needs to clearly lead to your study purpose. It is a specific problem statement which clarifies the research gap at the end of the background section. The problem should be stated in one clear question or sentence. Before you state the problem, you should start by recapping what you just told the reader the current state of the knowledge is about the topic within your discipline. Think of this sentence as the lead-in to the problem. Now comes the critical step of articulating the problem that your study will then help to solve. The actual problem statement serves as a clear transition from the literature review to the study purpose. Your purpose or research question will help to solve your problem. Therefore, the problem statement and the research purpose need to support each other. By the time the reader reaches your purpose, they should already have an idea what it will be and know why it is important. It is also helpful to state the consequences of either filling or not filling the gap in knowledge. If you establish the importance of the issue for your audience here, your proposal will be more likely to get the attention of other researchers, key stakeholders, or funding agencies. By clearly articulating your problem, the reader will have a clear understanding of why your study is needed. The next logical thing to do is present your research purpose. Articulating the problem statement is a difficult task. Like the purpose, you should revisit, critique, and revise it several times throughout your proposal or paper writing process. Every time you make a decision about the study, ask yourself if what you are doing helps to solve your problem and answer your question. Thank you for watching. Be sure to visit my channel for more helpful paper and proposal writing guidance.
So just remember, one of the things we have been really reiterating with students as we go through your PICO question, as you're writing your paper, you're going to find that the PICO may change, and that's okay. That's part of research. When I did my research, my PICO question changed about 10 times throughout my study, because as I learned more and I started to develop more evidence from my literature review, I started to realize I had to look at my particular research problem differently in order to actually fill the knowledge gap and make it worth doing the study. So just keep that in mind, and that's okay. Just because your PICO changes does not mean your topic needs to change. It's just rewording the PICO to really best fit the needs of the study. Okay, now let's get into the background, all right? And this is the same Nurse Killian, and she talks about how you apply your background information.
Today we are going to talk about how to establish the importance of your research study. You will most often see this section called the background or literature review. This step is of critical importance to any research proposal, ethics proposal, dissertation, or publication. Be sure to check the guidelines wherever you are submitting your background to make sure you have included everything they expect. Throughout this entire section, you need to build a case for your study's purpose. Think of it like setting the stage for your research. For this reason, I normally work on writing this section of the proposal once I am clear what the purpose of my study will be. While this section may be written after the study purpose is formulated, it is important that I am engaged in the literature and know where the gaps are before I develop a purpose or design a study. But that is a conversation for another video. Your job in the background section of your paper is to convince the reader that your study is important and meaningful within your field of study. After all, you might be competing with other studies for funding. It answers the question, so what? Why should we care about this study? In this section, you need to establish what is known about your topic, clearly identify the research problem, and convince the reader that more research is needed. This section also helps to establish your own competence, since it shows that you have evaluated existing literature. Start by addressing the significance of the issue under investigation. What impact does the issue have on people? Two common ways to establish significance are by talking about the scope and/or magnitude of the issue. A good way to show the scope of a health problem is by including statistics about the number of people who have a particular problem. Try as much as possible to use statistics that relate to the setting of your population under study or the journal you are trying to publish in. When statistics are not available for your particular issue, focus on how much of an impact the issue has on the lives of individuals. Perhaps it is not known how many people experience an issue, but it is known how detrimental an issue is to those that do experience it. By showing the magnitude of a problem, you can establish that the study could make a large difference in the lives of those individuals. You also need to be sure you address the relevance of your study. You need to convince the reader that your study is important within the context of your discipline. As a nurse researcher, I would talk about how the issue impacts nurses, perhaps through an influence on workload, safety, or burnout. The amount of space you will have will vary depending on the guidelines you are given. However, in any of these situations, avoid being repetitive or wordy. The significance of an issue can often be effectively established in 1 to 3 sentences. These first few sentences are critical in capturing the reader's attention, so they are interested in your research. After introducing the significance of your issue, you need to discuss what is known about the topic. It is very important that you are selective and critical of the literature you choose to review. Include your evaluation of pertinent works, which may involve seminal and recent research. Each and every sentence you include needs to guide the reader on a logical path towards the need for your study. For example, if my research is addressing a gap related to limited knowledge of student perceptions on a nursing issue, I would not focus on critiquing small sample sizes or limited generalizability in existing literature. Why? Addressing a gap related to perceptions would logically lead to a qualitative study. Therefore, my study would not involve larger sample sizes or improved generalizability. Instead, I may critique that existing literature has not examined these perceptions. Every time you critique existing literature, ask yourself if the critique helps to build a case for your study. If it doesn't, reframe the critique or get rid of it. The literature review needs to be organized. Organize it in a way that makes sense for building a case for your research purpose. Often, literature is organized by conceptual categories or in chronological order. Before writing your proposal, take a look at how other literature related to your issue is organized. Their organization may give you ideas for how to present your work, without plagiarizing, of course. Particularly when there is a lot of literature on a topic, you need to avoid including every single study you have read. Your evaluation of the literature included in your background should give the reader a clear impression of how you will be building on what is already known. Show how your study will be different and address the gap in knowledge. For example, you may identify a gap in knowledge related to circumstances that have changed since other work was done. Perhaps your study is unique because of the setting it is being conducted in. If preliminary work or pilot studies have been done, they can be included to show the aim of your study is feasible. The literature review needs to lead to a clearly identified gap in knowledge. Think of a gap as what is not known. It is a problem that has not been addressed yet in the literature. Clearly establishing the gap is critical because your purpose needs to address this gap. Remember, your purpose statement drives the rest of your proposal, so put some thought into this step. The statement of the research problem identifies this gap in knowledge. Typically, near the end of your background section, you will lead up to the problem statement by clearly summarizing what is known about the topic. Then identify what is not known. The reason you do a research study is typically a lack or insufficiency of knowledge in existing literature. Focus on clearly identifying the gap that your study will address in a sentence or two. Your purpose statement will logically follow. Consider if you should incorporate a theoretical or conceptual framework in the background section. Some people choose to include one as part of their background section, whereas for others, it makes more sense to have a separate section. If you choose to organize your literature by concepts, you may already be working on a conceptual framework for the study without even knowing it. If you are working on a proposal, there may be a separate section to include for your framework. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it helpful, please let me know by liking it or commenting.
Okay, so that's a review of the background statement. The next thing I wanted to just go over is, so you're aware of how this is all going to come together, is the EBP poster presentation. Now, this will actually be done in your next class in Research Part 2. It's your basically your PICO question broken down. But the nice thing about the EBP posters is it's kind of a review of what you're writing within your paper. So just keep in mind this evidence and this literature that you're writing about is going to be broken down within your poster presentation, which is going to include the introduction, project goals, evaluation, description, findings, your references, your conclusions, and what you came up with within your research. So these are just some examples of evidence-based practice poster presentations, and it's basically a summary of your actual thesis. So this here we did building evidence-based practice skills in staff nurses, changing the concept of sudden infant death syndrome, the changing concept. Here's some, you can't really read it because they kind of blurred it so you don't copy it, but here's how they broke it down. This is a beautifully broken down evidence-based poster done through Pace University, done by a student there. Actually, it was a group of students. They did their PICO question, the background, search strategy, review of literature, major EBP recommendations, method of implementation, and evaluation of their practice change, as well as their references. But again, this is all going to be included within your thesis. So I wanted to just give you an overview of what this will look like visually. Again, same thing, background, design and methods, data collection and analysis, results, conclusions, limitations, and further studies. This was done on a central line dressing changes EBP-based project. Here we have one, evidence-based care of homeless women, a protocol for depression. Very similar breakdown. The good and the bad and the ugly of bedside report. Again, another breakdown within a study. So that's the end of the show. We're going to break down into groups, break out into groups to start beginning our abstract for our thesis. All right.